Hi, Jamie.
Hi, welcome, welcome. Happy week, happy weekend.
Yeah, happy weekend to you. So, I think you've had quite a full-on week, and but just reflecting on maybe some of the things that we talked about last time. Certainly, these conversations we have, I feel like it's almost for me, it feels like training that I'm learning more and more every time I speak to you. But I think one of the things um, that sort of cropped up this week is, I guess, partly the term Gestalt language processor, whether we mean Gestalt processor, Gestalt language processor, who gets to decide. And the other thing that feels really quite poignant is this, for me, is the lifelong element of how you process your description of processing of maybe at times in your life not having the scripts, and it was quite a jolt thinking, gosh, here I am, speech and language therapist, supporting very young children, their families, their sort of teaching education staff, and maybe we come to a point and it's sort of like you're ready to go now, but the long term aspect, I think that's something I'd really like to get your views on, and your lived experience is really interesting.
Well, thank you for that wonderful setup, I guess. What, I think it would shock some people who listen to this, that children become adults,
Hmm.
that human children grow up, they grow old, um, and they mature at different paces and all of that kind of stuff. But there is a prevailing view of autism. There is a prevailing view of language development that kind of stuck in childhood, right? Peter Pan or something like that. Excuse me. And then, like in special education, you're timed out at a certain age, whether it's 18 or 22, like it is in California or whatever.
Yeah.
And then what? And then what happens, And I've written extensively about how I was kind of stuck at stage three in the, in the NLA terms for decades because I had no recognition of it. I had no support. I was not safe. And finally, a very wonderful woman, no experience with language processing or anything like that. She's a public speaker. She was, um, but she did recognize I was illiterate, and she had enough care for me to say, I'm not going to be the one that helps you develop your literacy, but I have a very good professional network, and I'm sure I can find someone to help you. And she found a bunch of people to help me, and I kind of rocketed through the stages into a functional literacy and then into full literacy in several years, and then what? Stage
Mm.
six. Okay, now what? Right? Others have imagined. I know I read a nice piece from Cher Griffith, who imagines, stages seven, eight, and nine, and is writing towards that. And she herself identifies, as autistic, as a Gestalt processor, and so on. And we go down that road. If I'm a Gestalt processor of language, I'm also a Gestalt processor of meaning, and the meaning making that we do in our lives is processed whole to part,
Hmm.
right? And so everything about my experience of life is whole to part. When when I have kind of a nebulous feeling about something that triggers me or whatever, I feel the totality of it.
Hmm.
And then I can sit with it and it can mature in that kind of theater of my mind. And then it arrives and I have to get to a keyboard. I
Hmm.
have to write. And I'm so thankful that I am old at a time when there is tech, because I remember typing on an actual typewriter and I hated it because it was so slow. And as fast as I can make my fingers move, it was just nonsense. It was babble. But now I have a very nice keyboard and a very nice computer, and I can do wonderful things with it. So I'm very happy to be alive at this time, but I'm old. right? And
Mm.
I think the system does not recognize that we grow up, we fall in love, we want careers, we want, professional validation, we want to do well in that passion of ours, and that sometimes our passions become our professions. And then, as I wrote in the piece that released today, I work in a system that is set up by law and statute to support students with what they call special needs, including autistic students, students with specific learning disabilities, students with other health impairments like ADHD, students with mobility, vision impairments, all of these kinds of things
Mm.
that the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act calls out and says these are the things that we are doing, traumatic brain injuries, all sorts of things. And yet the system itself does not imagine that one of those children would ever be a peer, would ever enter that profession. And so I find myself in professional spaces. I'm still autistic, right? I'm 55 years old.
Mhm.
I'm still autistic, right?
Yeah.
I'm still a Gestalt processor of life,
Yeah.
right? Whole to part processor of life. And so I find myself kind of writing myself into coherence because I've never seen in any kind of professional development stuff the kind of things I don't see, like that whole windows and mirrors concept. I don't
Mm.
see myself reflected in the materials. I can't see through them and out them to my own life experience. And so, part of the
Mm.
almost 1,800 pieces now on the outside, books and so on, was because I didn't see myself there. Holistic language instruction. I identified why I was literate when I left school and set about to change it.
Mm.
As a foreigner, I wrote about the experience of learning English, right? And that became the latest book that, I think I'm not sure exactly which um a couple of days ago, I think now.
Mm.
I can spend a whole day and not say a single word, and that's foreign to somebody. Like I don't exist in the world of words. I do it
Yeah.
because I have to, not because I want to. And so we talk about, Chomsky and the language acquisition device, and we talk about the Sapir-Whorf, that language is the forming of meaning and all that kind of stuff. But what if you're like me and language was never present at the beginning? That I
Hmm.
did not acquire a language. I learned every single language I speak and I interact in, and English was not the first that I learned and spoke in. And
Hmm.
so, from that standpoint, it's foreign to me, and it will always be foreign to me. And so that's the latest book, and all of these kinds of things. I'm
Yeah.
trying to explain myself to myself, right? And that people subscribe and support. I'm flattered. I'm sometimes shocked when I see that people are reading it, and I'm sometimes brought to tears over some of the comments that come in, how I've touched
But
a life
then,
or whatever. And
yeah. But Jamie, you described yourself, you know, a few decades ago as being illiterate. And yet, everybody who reads your essays, it's more than just um, it's not just about information or learning a bit more about you. The way that you describe the style, the rhythm, the rhythms of your writing, because that's something, because I read all of your, everything you write, I read and I think about the rhythms of it. And it's just so it just helps to understand the style of processing that is definitely different to mine. And I sort of now I'm thinking as a teacher, maybe there's another book in you about teaching as a Gestalt processor, Gestalt processors.
right, so in the pieces that are coming in the
Mm.
week or 10 days from now, I kind of walk through a process of what's happening to me right now, internally, professionally,
Mm.
emotionally. I'm a pensioner, retired from civil service. and I teach because my pension has been erased essentially by inflation here in America.
Hmm.
And I find myself loving it, right? I'm not complaining at all. I'm just saying that when I was the age of the students that I support, I would never have imagined that I would be doing this, right?
Hmm.
That I would be in classroom, that I could explain things to students of geometry, of trigonometry, of calculus, that they would understand, right? And I think, my ancestry, my relationship with my grandmother,
Hmm.
um, and how Gaelic life is a bit different than English life, let's say,
Yeah.
where things are more lyrical, things are more story based. There's less hierarchy. It's more metristic. Kind of the grandmother is kind of the head of the family essentially, and things are passed down through story and through song. And I was trying to explain to a colleague who's American Irish that there were certain songs, kind of pub songs, if you will, that we all grew up with and that we all knew. And yes, I was illiterate and yes, I was new to language, but I had that cadence. I knew, and my grand, she spoke of like 1745 like it was last Thursday.
Hmm.
Um, we just had that kind of, the Acts of Union, just the anniversary of it was just the other day. And all of my Scottish friends are all on about that and stuff. Um, but it's like a fresh wound that will never close. And so if you grow up with Robert Burns, right, and that kind of rebellious poetry and that lyricism and the way of translating loss and tragedy and politics and stuff into song, right, and I think that's what American students miss about Burns is their songs essentially.
Hmm.
And if you've ever heard, an American poetry teacher read A Man's a Man, you'd be turned off from Burns. But if you hear Paolo Nutini, for example, at the Barrowlands belting it out, then you're ready to go to war, right? And where's the bagpipes and where's my kilt and all of this stuff? And so I think, you know, there's a passion for story at the bottom of all of this because that's how I learned. I was trying to explain to a colleague of mine, he's 27 years old, he's only ever been a teacher, he's teaching calculus, and he's not connecting with students. And he was very curious because, he's a very brilliant young man, and he was not connecting. I was illiterate in school, and yet I took and passed calculus and physics. So he's not figuring out how this was. And so I explained to him that my teachers were old when they were teaching. They were veterans of the Cold War. They were veterans of the Vietnam War, of some of
Yeah.
Korean War. And they were engineers, battlefield engineers. And so they were calculating ballistic trajectories with slide rules in real time because, second place is you're dead. And all of these stories that they wrapped all of this stuff around. My physics teacher was the baseball coach. And so we did like the physics of curveballs and these kinds of things. And it was alive, it was vibrant. It wasn't just some dreary text that is addressing
Mm.
standards and all of this kind of stuff. And so I found myself like, I still have my slide rule. I still can use it. Last year, I brought it out in trigonometry class to deal with logarithms, and the kids thought it was like some Martian relic or something that fell out of space. They had no idea what it was. And I explained to them that I grew up poor. I grew up, first in care and then poor in a poor family, and that calculators at the time I was in school were for the rich kids,
Yeah.
that the poor kids didn't have one. And so I got my hands on a slide rule and I begged a few teachers to teach me how to use it. And that once I understood the patterns, how everything, connected on the scales, I was actually faster than my peers in doing that. And it doesn't really have anything to do with literacy. It just has pattern recognition, which is
Yeah.
a very
Yeah.
autistic thing, I think. Um, but yes, it's a very interesting thing. And so we get into to kind of finish the story with my colleague,
Mm.
we get into how everything is so rigid and standards based and funneled that it produces a very specific kind of teacher. And that when I bring up things like that kind of stuff, they don't know what to do with it because they've been told it's crap. and they've moved on from it. And so, some of my writing, I explain, non-Euclidean geometry, and I use it to frame Gestalt processing. And so a piece that was released just a few days ago, yes, you deal with the three physical dimensions and stuff,
Mm,
but then, this attunement that we talk about in Gestalt processing is really the fourth dimension. It's the field level that we can feel,
mm,
I think we conflate a lot of this with autism, but I think they're two kind of distinct things. Autistics can be Gestalt processors, but they also can be analytics. Um, but when we sense a break in the field, we have to be able to describe that somehow scientifically. And so I kind of ascribe that to the fourth dimension. And then I describe kind of meaning time, where we Gestalt processors might not have seen somebody for 20 years, right? And it's like time was never relevant. It's like, it was like yesterday. And time itself is not necessarily important, but meaning is, and
mhm.
how it's held and carried through and stuff. And it's how kind of my gran seems like she's standing right next to me, even though she's been deceased since the 80s. Um, and that, Euclidean time cannot hold this. It has no answer for this. And yet this is how we experience life. And so it must be documented somehow.
Yeah.
But when I experience things in delay, it's called defective, right? When I
Mm,
recognize something after a week of writing it out, it's called confusion, right? When I reorganize reality and use, kind of 100-year-old non-solid, non-Euclidean geometries, they call it fantasy, right? When I try to express joy and how it
mhm,
reshapes memories and stuff, they call it distortion, right? Mental illness, whatever. But as I'm finding, as I meet more people who are like me, we know better. We've just never been allowed to define it for ourselves
mhm.
on all these things. So I write. I teach geometry, I teach trigonometry to students, and curriculum that the school has bought is analytic. It presents sequential parts and expects students to arrive at a whole at some point. And
Mm,
if they don't, it's no bother. We're just moving on, right? Because punctuality is more important than knowledge. And so about 40% of the classes have Gestalt processors in them. They're just not identified. And so I will present the whole. This is what we're on about. This is the story behind what we're doing in this geometry.
mm,
Um, and I have the space to do that. I have kind of the age and the credibility to do that. And the students do well when I do that. When I
yeah,
move from that whole to part, this is why we're
yeah.
doing it. Um,
And did you
and
explain
so,
that to your colleague?
yes,
And do you
yes.
think he got it?
He's a brilliant young man, so I know he understood it. I don't think he wanted it. That's right.
Okay.
Because I think there's something that age gives us, and that's the ability to move into a relationship kind of easily, where we
Yeah.
can chat and so on. That I think the younger generations have a bit of trouble with. They have trouble chatting to people, right? And if you
Hmm.
think about, from Britain's standpoint, the decline of pubs since Thatcher, right? Not to get political, but just the quantity of them, right? Or the decline of the curry house since
Yeah.
Thatcher, right? How few and few and few, and now it's kind of accelerating, right? But where is the space that we get together to chat to
Mhm.
strangers, to mates,
Yeah.
right? And just have these conversations and where are these spaces where, the politician and the pipe fitter can sit and have a pint and a chat? They don't exist really. And so we're left to wonder why kiddos aren't, getting on or whatever. And
Yeah.
so you have, obviously COVID and pandemic and all of that stuff. But I try to be open, I try to be conversational, I try to be honest and free with story and attempts at connection.
Mm,
I left a couple of books that are favorites of mine with my colleague for some story, so some background knowledge
hmm.
that he can use to kind of help with his calculus and stuff. And they're reprints of stuff from before Einstein, right? And how geometry and calculus and space and time and stuff were perceived
Mm,
before Einstein kind of sealed the deal on four dimensions. But there's some fascinating stuff in there, proofs and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we have to teach the children how to write proofs for their 11th grade exams. And so, um, these are helpful, how to have these kind of claims, provide the evidence, the reasoning, and so on. But I think, this past week and this coming week's articles are all around that kind of process. What really is Gestalt processing? What
Mhm.
is, if it's not Gestalt, what is it? If it's not
Yeah.
processing, what is it?
Yeah.
Right? If it's not autism, if it's not selfism, because all of us autistic people are very connected to each other, right?
Absolutely. So
So
I
it's not
think
selfism.
no, and I think that that will probably be our theme for next week. But I guess we need to kind of wrap things up today. And I think the thing that I'm really taking away from today's conversation is attunement.
Oh, aye.
That's the word that I feel really, from your description with your colleague, from your grandmother, your students, with autistic peers, you know, uh, being in the pub. It's with, like you say, the pipe cleaner and the politician. Um, it's that attunement feels what is key to um, understanding how we all, well, how all of us process. But I think if we're wanting to really support our Gestalt language processors, our Gestalt processors, our Gestalt language users, whatever we're going to say, attunement feels really key.
Oh, aye. And I think there's kind of a theme there when you look at, you know, the speech then and the social media stuff that comes out. It does have that kind of undercurrent to it where, all of the things that you're highlighting are attuned to the children that you are working with, and the other people who are in that orbit. It's all attuned. Like, hey, look at this is, you know, this is my client and, she's this stage or whatever, and this is what she has chosen to do. And it's never like, oh no, you must not do that. You must do this other thing because, in the hierarchy of whatever's it says that it's time to do this. No, it's like, you want to play this way? Great, we'll play this way and we'll build in a lesson. And that whole aspect of child-led
Mm,
I think is attunement. Absolutely. We've just never called it that.
no, but and I feel lucky that I sit here on a Saturday with you and I feel attuned.
Oh,
Before we start recording, we have our little chat and think about, just talk about our week. But it feels, yeah, attunement. And sometimes I never know which direction things are going to go in. It's the most organic thing I've ever been involved in. And I love it for that. Absolutely love
well, I love it as well. And there's a piece coming up in a few days. Um, I finally found clothes that fit right. Right. And the
it.
attunement, dressing, the title of the
Yeah.
piece is called Dressing for Attunement. And
Yeah.
just the kind of sensory safety, the kind of, you know, atmospheric safety of finding clothes that fit finally, right? Because I am very tall, right? And so we say like the professions don't imagine an autistic person. Well, fashion doesn't imagine somebody my size,
No.
and so I've always had to have bespoke clothing, but I'm a school teacher now and I can afford it. So finding stuff that fits and flatters is difficult, but I found some wearing one at the moment. I really love it. It's very comfortable. And so I feel more confident and all of these things. But that attunement is for me, I think, kind of the grounding word, if you will,
Mm,
in a lot of things that are happening right now.
definitely. Well, on that note, I will look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to reading this week's essays very much so on the Substack. So thank you.
It's always a pleasure. I love it. I love these weekends. So thank you.
See you next week.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.